When a man's past becomes his prison and a woman's desperation becomes her cage, what happens when the bars are built from their own hands? This isn't a love story. This is a reckoning. Stay until the end. The truth will change everything you thought you knew. Drop a comment telling me if you could live with what these two had to carry. Wyoming Territory, 1877. The stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Fort Bridger, and Abigail Hayes climbed down into dust and dying light. 24 years old, dark hair pulled tight against her skull, eyes that had stopped crying 3 weeks ago when her uncle sold her debts to a man named Garrett. Indian agent Samuel Garrett stood waiting with a smile like a knife wound. Miss Hayes. Punctual. I admire that in merchandise. Abigail's hands didn't shake anymore. Fear had burned itself out somewhere between St. Louis and here. The papers said I'm to work as a school teacher on the reservation. Eventually. Garrett's smile widened. First, you're to marry one of our Apache scouts. Name's Broken Tongue. Well, that's what we call him. He had a Blackfeet name once, but he gave that up when he started working for the army. Smart man. Knows which side feeds him. I don't understand. You will. Garrett turned toward a figure standing in the shadow of the fort wall. Come meet your husband, Miss Hayes. He's been very patient. The man who stepped forward moved like someone who'd forgotten how bodies should work. Tall, lean, dressed in cavalry scout's clothing that hung on him wrong. His face was carved from stone, but the stone was cracked. When his eyes met Abigail's, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Guilt. Pure and absolute. This is your doing, Garrett, the man said in English smoother than Abigail expected. Don't pretend she came willingly. Oh, I never pretend. Garrett pulled papers from his coat. Miss Hayes here owes her deceased father's gambling debts to several establishments I've recently acquired. The sum is significant. Marriage to you settles the matter. She becomes your responsibility. You remain let's say my voice when I need to communicate with the more stubborn tribal members. Abigail found her voice. You're blackmailing us both. I'm creating efficiency. Garrett handed the papers to a fort chaplain who'd appeared beside them. Reverend Morrison has agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. The reservation council expects you both by morning. They've been told this marriage strengthens ties between their people and the agency. Everyone wins. Except, no one was winning. Abigail could see that in the way the man called Broken Tongue stood perfectly still, like movement might shatter whatever kept him upright. The ceremony took 11 minutes. Abigail spoke her vows to a stranger who looked at her like she was another nail in his coffin. When Morrison pronounced them married, Broken Tongue's jaw tightened once, then went slack again. Congratulations, Garrett said. Your supplies are loaded. Report to me in 3 days with the council's decision on the land cession. And Broken Tongue? Remember what happens if you forget whose side you're on. They rode north in darkness. Abigail behind her new husband on a horse that seemed to know the way without guidance. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her except to help her mount, his touch brief and cold as winter metal. After 2 hours, Abigail couldn't stand it anymore. What did Garrett mean? About whose side you're on? Silence. You're Blackfeet, but you work for the army. As what? A translator? More silence. Then finally, yes. Just yes? His shoulders tightened. What else do you want me to say? That I betray my own people for army wages? That I translate lies into truth and truth into lies until I can't remember which is which? You already know what I am. Garrett made sure of that. I don't know anything, Abigail said, except that we're both trapped. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. You're trapped by debt. I'm trapped by what I've done. Those aren't the same thing. They rode the rest of the way in silence, arriving at the reservation settlement just before dawn. Broken Tongue led her to a small cabin at the edge of the main camp, away from the clustered dwellings and ceremonial lodge. You'll sleep there. He pointed to a pallet against the far wall. I'll be outside most nights. Easier that way. Easier for who? For you. Once you understand what sleeping under the same roof as me means. He turned to leave, then stopped. Garrett will send for us soon. When he does, Say nothing about what you see or hear. The less you know, the safer you are. Safe from what? But he was already gone, leaving Abigail alone in a cabin that smelled like abandonment. She didn't sleep. As dawn broke, she heard voices outside, angry voices, speaking in Blackfeet. She recognized one word repeated several times, her husband's name, not broken tongue. Something else. Something that made the speakers sound like they were spitting poison. When Broken Tongue returned hours later, he had a fresh bruise along his jaw. What happened? They welcomed me home. His voice was flat. The way they always do. Abigail stood. You're bleeding. I've bled before. He moved to a basin, splashing water on his face. When he looked up, Abigail saw the blood wasn't from the bruise. His knuckles were split. Did you fight back? No. He dried his hands carefully, methodically. I never fight back. That's not how this works. How does it work? He finally looked at her directly, and the emptiness in his eyes made Abigail step backward. They hit me. I let them. We all pretend it makes anything better. Then I go translate more lies for Garrett, and they hate me more. And the cycle continues. You'll see it soon enough. Everyone here knows what I am. What are you? A coward who chose survival over honor. He said it like reciting a catechism. A man who watched his people starve and chose army rations instead. A translator who knew the treaties were false but spoke the words anyway. A scout who led soldiers to hidden camps so I could keep breathing one more day. The confession came out mechanically, rehearsed through repetition. But underneath the flat delivery, Abigail heard something else. Not justification, not even regret. Just acceptance of damnation. How many? She asked quietly. How many what? How many people died because of what you translated? What you told the soldiers? His hands stopped moving. 17 that I know of. Probably more that I don't. The winter camp raid was my fault. I told them it was empty when I knew it wasn't. But I told the soldiers it was dangerous, so they went in ready to fire. Everyone who died there, I killed them. Abigail sat down slowly. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked. Because you're my wife now. And you should know what that means. Because when they look at you with hatred for being married to me, you'll understand why. He moved toward the door. There's food in the chest. Women from the camp will come eventually. They'll teach you what you need to know. They won't be kind, but they won't hurt you. That's saved for me. Wait. Abigail stood. Why did you agree to this marriage? Garrett forced me, but you could have refused. For the first time, something almost like emotion crossed his face. No, I couldn't, because Garrett knows about the children. What children? The ones from the winter camp. 3 children survived the raid. Garrett found them before anyone else did. He keeps them in a school back east. Fed, clothed, educated. As long as I do what he wants, they stay alive and safe. The day I refuse him is the day they disappear. The door closed behind him, and Abigail understood. This wasn't just guilt. This was a life sentence with no possibility of parole. But what she didn't know yet was that the worst parts were still hidden. The reservation women came that afternoon, 5 of them, led by an older woman whose face was carved from the same stone as Broken Tongue's. They entered without knocking, examined Abigail like livestock, and began speaking in rapid Blackfeet. Abigail understood none of it, but tone translated clearly enough. This was not welcome. This was assessment. Finally, the older woman spoke in halting English. I am Winter's heart. You are the white woman Garrett forced on Hollow Voice. Hollow Voice? His name. His real name. Before soldiers broke his tongue with their lies. Winter's heart's eyes were hard. You sleep here? You work. We teach because you are useless otherwise. But do not think this makes you one of us. You are another chain around his neck. I didn't choose this. Neither did 17 dead. Winter's heart's words hit like stones. Neither did 3 stolen children. Neither did families who starve because Hollow Voice translates away our hunting rights. Your white skin chose plenty. The other women set to work showing Abigail basic tasks with rough efficiency. How to prepare dried meat. Where to gather water. Which plants to avoid. Every instruction came with barely concealed contempt. But Abigail noticed something else. When Winter's heart thought no one was watching, she looked toward the door with an expression that wasn't quite hatred. Closer to grief. "He's your son," Abigail said quietly. The women stopped working. Winter's heart turned slowly, her face unreadable. "He was my son. The man who lives now is something else. Something the army made. Something that wears his face, but carries death in his mouth. He told me about the winter camp. About the children. Did he tell you about his father?" Winter's heart's voice dropped lower. "His father who starved himself so Hollow Voice could eat. Who died believing his son would lead our people. Did he tell you he translated the words that sold the land where his father is buried?" Abigail had no answer. Winter's heart nodded. "He told you the easy parts. The parts that make him sound like he had no choice. But there were always choices. He just chose himself. Every time." The women left as the sun began setting. Abigail sat alone in the cabin, trying to reconcile the man who confessed his sins so readily, with the one who had apparently been given choices. When Broken Tongue, Hollow Voice, returned after dark, Abigail was waiting. "Your mother was here." He stopped in the doorway. "She spoke to you?" "She told me about your father, about the land, about choices." Abigail watched him carefully. "You said you had no choice, but she says different." He stood perfectly still for a long moment, then stepped inside and closed the door. "My mother sees the world simply, honor or dishonor, life or death. She doesn't understand the calculations." "What calculations?" "How many deaths to prevent how many others? Whether 3 living children are worth 17 dead adults. Whether my life is worth more than my honor." He sat heavily on the floor, back against the wall. "The first time I translated falsely, I told myself it was temporary, just until things improved. The second time I told myself it prevented something worse. By the 10th time, I'd stopped telling myself anything. I just did it. Why not run? Take the children and disappear." "Where?" "There's nowhere the army doesn't reach. And I'm marked now. Every tribe knows what I am. I'd be killed on sight by my own people. And Garrett would find the children anyway." He looked up at her. "You want me to say I'm a victim? That I had no real choice? But the truth is, I chose the hard math. 3 children versus 17 dead. My life versus my honor. And I keep choosing it. That's what makes me unredeemable." Abigail sat across from him, the cabin's width between them. "Garrett said you need to get the council's decision on land cession. What happens if they refuse?" "Then Garrett finds another way. Usually involving threats about rations or soldiers or children disappearing. And I translate his threats into polite suggestions until the council believes they're making their own choice." His voice was hollow. "That's my gift. Making oppression sound like opportunity." "What if you didn't?" He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "What?" "What if you translated honestly? Told the council exactly what Garrett threatens? Let them make a real choice? Then 3 children die. Along with everyone here who depends on agency rations to survive the winter. Along with me, probably. And Garrett brings in another translator who's even more willing to lie." He shook his head. "I've run those calculations 1,000 times. There's no winning path. Only degrees of losing." They sat in silence. Finally, Abigail spoke. "He forced me to marry you because I'm collateral. Another way to control you. But what if I became something else?" "Like what?" "Like someone who understands the calculations." Abigail's voice was steady. "I can't change your past, can't make you innocent, but maybe I can help carry the weight." Hollow Voice stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm trapped here too, Entrapped people either destroy each other or figure out how to survive together. She met his eyes. I'm not interested in destroying anyone else. I've had enough of that. Something shifted in his expression. Not hope. That would be too much. But maybe a hairline crack in the stone. Garrett meets with the council tomorrow. You'll see how this works. And then you'll understand why carrying this weight will crush you too. But Abigail had already been crushed. What rose from those ruins was harder than Garrett expected. What neither of them knew was that tomorrow would break everything they thought they understood about calculations and choices and which lives mattered more than others. The council meeting happened in the main lodge, before tribal elders and Garrett's cold assessment. Abigail sat behind Hollow Voice as he'd instructed, watching. Garrett opened with pleasantries that rang hollow. Gentlemen, I come with an opportunity. The government wishes to purchase the northern hunting territory. In exchange, we'll provide increased rations, a new school building, and medical supplies. Hollow Voice translated in Blackfeet, his voice mechanical. But Abigail noticed something. His hands were shaking. An elder called Running Wolf spoke, his words sharp and fast. Hollow Voice translated. He asks what happens if the council refuses. Then the government will be forced to consider this territory abandoned, Garrett replied smoothly. And abandoned territories are open to settlement. Better to sell now and receive compensation than lose it anyway with nothing gained. Hollow Voice translated. But Abigail heard something in his Blackfeet that didn't match the English. Something extra. Something that made the elders' faces harden. Running Wolf spoke again, longer this time. Hollow Voice's translation came slowly. He says the people remember other promises, other compensations that never arrived. That was under the previous administration, Garrett said. I assure you, another elder interrupted, voice rising. Hollow Voice translated. He says promises from white men are like morning mist. They disappear when touched. Garrett's smile tightened. Perhaps Hollow Voice could remind the council that their children in government schools receive excellent care. It would be unfortunate if funding for those programs was reconsidered. The temperature in the lodge dropped. Every face turned toward Hollow Voice, waiting. Abigail saw his hands stop shaking, saw something click into place behind his eyes. When he spoke in Blackfeet, it was clear and strong. Whatever he said made Running Wolf sit back hard. Made Winter's heart, standing at the lodge's edge, press her hand to her mouth, made every elder stare at Hollow Voice like he'd spoken in tongues. Garrett leaned forward. What did you tell them? Hollow Voice met his gaze. I told them exactly what you said, that you're threatening their children. That's not what It's exactly what you meant. Hollow Voice's voice was still flat, but something underneath had changed. I've translated your threats politely for 3 years, made them sound like suggestions, made the council believe they were negotiating. But they weren't negotiating. They were surrendering. And I helped you take everything while making them think they were making choices. Garrett stood slowly. You're making a mistake. I've already made all the mistakes. Hollow Voice turned to the council, speaking in Blackfeet again. Long, careful sentences that made the elders lean forward. What are you telling them? Garrett demanded. The truth. Hollow Voice switched to English, addressing everyone. I'm telling them about the 17 people who died in the winter camp raid because I led soldiers there. I'm telling them about every treaty I mistranslated. Every threat I made sound gentle. Every time I chose my survival over theirs. And I'm telling them that Agent Garrett holds 3 children from that raid hostage in a school back east, and that he's threatened to harm them if I stop lying for him. The lodge erupted. Garrett lunged forward, but Running Wolf's hand caught his shoulder. The elder's grip was iron. You've just killed those children, Garrett hissed at Hollow Voice. And yourself. Maybe. Hollow Voice stood. But I'm done killing everyone else first. Abigail rose too, her voice cutting through the chaos. The children's location is in Agent Garrett's files at Fort Bridger. I saw the papers before we left. Building 4, Room 117. They're registered under the names of 3 deceased soldiers to hide them from official records. Every eye turned to her. Garrett's face went purple. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your victim too. Abigail's hands were steady. Those children are evidence of your blackmail. Proof you've been extorting a federal scout. The army won't like that. Neither will Washington. The math had changed. Garrett's leverage had just become his liability. Running Wolf spoke, and this time Hollow Voice translated with something like hope. He says riders will be sent to Fort Bridger tonight. If the children are there, they'll be brought home. If not. He paused. If not, then we know you're still lying, and nothing has changed. Garrett straightened his jacket, trying to reclaim control. This is treason. Federal crimes. You'll both hang. Maybe, Abigail agreed, but you'll hang beside us, and those children will testify about how they got to that school. The meeting ended, with Garrett escorted out by warriors who made it clear his safety depended on good behavior. The council dismissed, but Running Wolf caught Hollow Voice's arm. The elder spoke quietly. Hollow Voice translated for Abigail. He says, I'm still a traitor. That 17 dead don't come back because I finally told one truth. But he also says a man who admits his guilt carries more honor than one who pretends innocence. What does that mean? Abigail asked. It means I'm not forgiven, but maybe I'm not completely lost. Hollow Voice looked at his mother across the lodge. Winter's heart stared back, her face unreadable. Then she nodded once. Just once. Hollow Voice's breath caught. That night, back in their cabin, Abigail and Hollow Voice sat in silence while the weight of what they'd done settled over them. If the children aren't there, Garrett wins, Hollow Voice said finally, and we've just painted targets on ourselves for nothing. And if they are, then maybe we've changed the math. He looked at her. Why did you do that? You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Because someone had to break the pattern. Abigail met his eyes. And because if I'm going to carry the weight of being married to you, I might as well carry the weight of the choices too. Something shifted between them then. Not love, that was too far away still. But partnership. The recognition that survival might mean standing together instead of apart. But neither of them knew that the real reckoning was still 3 days away. When the riders would return and everyone would learn the truth about calculations, children, and which lies were forgivable. The riders returned at dawn on the 3rd day. Abigail heard them before she saw them. Horses at full gallop, voices shouting in Blackfeet. Hollow Voice was already outside. Abigail followed, her heart hammering. 3 children climbed down from horses, thin and wide-eyed but alive. Behind them, a warrior carried saddlebags stuffed with papers. Winter's heart ran forward, dropping to her knees before the smallest child, a girl no more than 7. The girl stared at her. Then recognition dawned. Grandmother? Winter's heart pulled her close, and Abigail saw the older woman's shoulders shake with sobs. The other 2 children, boys, maybe 9 and 10, stood uncertain until other families surged forward. Reunions happened in waves of Blackfeet too fast for Abigail to follow. The warrior with the saddlebags approached Hollow Voice and dumped papers at his feet. When he spoke, his voice was harsh. Hollow Voice translated quietly for Abigail. He says these are Garrett's records. Every bribe, every threat, every mistranslation he ordered me to make. He says it's enough to destroy Garrett and probably the fort commander too. Then we won? Abigail asked. We survived. Hollow Voice watched the children being embraced by families. That's not the same as winning. Running Wolf approached, his expression grave. He spoke at length, and Hollow Voice's face grew tauter with each word. Finally, Hollow Voice turned to Abigail. The council has decided. Garrett will be reported to Washington with all evidence. The land cession is refused, and He swallowed hard. I'm allowed to stay, but I'm not Blackfeet anymore. They've removed me from the tribal roles. I can live on the reservation, but I have no voice in council, no claim to tradition. I exist here, but I don't belong. That's fair, Hollow Voice interrupted. That's fair. I killed their people and lied for 3 years. The fact that they let me breathe is more mercy than I deserve. Winter's heart approached, the little girl still clinging to her skirts. She spoke to hollow voice in Blackfeet, her voice low and intense. She says I'm her son again, hollow voice translated, his voice breaking. But I'm also still the man who got my father killed. She says both things are true, and I have to carry both. That's the price of confession. I don't get to be just one thing anymore. The little girl looked up at hollow voice. She spoke in hesitant English. You brought me home? Hollow voice knelt down to her level. I should have brought you home 3 years ago. I'm sorry it took this long. The girl considered this gravely, then said, Grandfather says sorry doesn't feed anyone, but it's a start. Despite everything, the trauma, the fear, the weight of the past, hollow voice smiled. It was small and broken, but it was real. Your grandfather was a wise man. Over the following weeks, the reservation transformed. Garrett was recalled to Washington to face charges. A new agent arrived, younger, idealistic, and genuinely interested in fair dealings. The children slowly reintegrated into families who'd mourned them as dead. Hollow voice worked as an interpreter again, but under new rules. Every translation was reviewed by Running Wolf. Every meeting included tribal witnesses. The sacred trust he'd broken was being rebuilt, one careful word at a time. But the nights were hardest. Abigail would wake to find him sitting outside, staring at nothing. One night, she joined him. I keep calculating, he said without preamble. 17 dead versus 3 living. My father versus those children. Every choice I made, and I can't figure out if I was wrong or just human. Maybe you were both, Abigail offered. That's what my mother says. But how do I live with both? The same way I live with being sold like property. The same way those children live with 3 stolen years. One day at a time, carrying what we can't change. He looked at her finally. Why are you still here? Garrett's gone. The debt is void. You could leave. And go where? Back to St. Louis where I'm a gambling debt that walked away? She shook her head. Besides, I meant what I said. We're in this together now. Even though you know what I am? Especially because I know. Abigail took his hand, the first time she'd initiated touch. You're a man who made terrible choices for complex reasons. And you're trying to make better ones now. That's more than most people manage. It doesn't fix anything, no, but it's something. They sat in silence, hands linked, carrying the weight of everything that couldn't be fixed. Slowly. So slowly Abigail barely noticed it happening. The distance between them began closing. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through small moments. Hollow voice teaching her Blackfeet phrases over evening meals. Abigail standing beside him during translation sessions, her presence a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. Shared work preparing their cabin for winter. Conversations about nothing and everything. One night, Abigail woke to find him sleeping inside for the first time. Not beside her. That boundary held. But inside, sharing the space. It was progress measured in inches, but inches were something. Winter's heart visited more often, bringing food and stories. She taught Abigail beadwork while speaking in Blackfeet, letting hollow voice translate. Sometimes she looked at her son with grief, sometimes with something softer. She says I'll never be fully forgiven, hollow voice translated one afternoon. But I'm not fully condemned either. I exist in the space between, and that's where I'll stay. Is that enough? Abigail asked. Winter's heart answered in careful English. Enough is what you make it. 6 months after the council meeting, Abigail realized she was pregnant. She told hollow voice one evening as they prepared dinner together, a routine they'd fallen into. He dropped the knife he was holding. Are you certain? Reasonably certain. He sat down slowly, face unreadable. A child. Our child. Yes. What will we tell them? About who I am. What I've done? Abigail sat across from him. We'll tell them the truth. That their father made terrible mistakes. That he's trying to live better. That some weights never go away. But we carry them anyway. That's a heavy thing to put on a child. Life is heavy. Better they learn that from us than from someone else. Hollow voice reached across the table, taking her hand. I don't deserve this. Any of it. You. A child. A second chance. Maybe not, but you're getting it anyway. What you do with it? That's the question. He held her hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. I'll try. I can't promise I'll succeed, but I'll try. That's all any of us can do. The baby came with spring, a daughter with Abigail's dark hair and Hollow Voice's sharp features. They named her Dawn Speaks Softly, marking both heritages. Winter's heart held her granddaughter and wept. She looks like her grandfather, the one who died. Hollow Voice stood beside Abigail, his hand on her shoulder. Then maybe some things come back. In different forms. Life settled into new patterns. Hollow Voice translated for the agency with careful precision, building trust one honest word at a time. Abigail taught reading and writing to reservation children in a small school building. Dawn grew in a cabin that slowly stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like a home. But the ghosts never left completely. On the anniversary of the winter camp raid, Hollow Voice walked to the site alone. When he returned hours later, his eyes were red. I talked to them, he said quietly. The 17. Told them about Dawn, about the 3 children who grew up because I finally stopped lying. Asked if that balanced the ledger. What did they say? Abigail asked, though she knew there'd been no answer. Nothing, because they're dead, and no amount of better choices brings them back. He looked at Abigail, his daughter, the life they'd built. But I keep trying anyway. Because what else is there? Years passed. Dawn learned both English and Blackfeet. She grew up knowing her father's story, not hidden or softened, but told honestly. She knew about the weight he carried, saw how some people wouldn't meet his eyes, while others nodded in passing. Why do they still hate Papa? She asked Abigail one day, watching warriors deliberately turn away from Hollow Voice. They don't hate him. They hate what he did. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Because if they hated him, they wouldn't let him live here. They wouldn't let him translate. They wouldn't acknowledge his efforts to do better. Abigail brushed hair from Dawn's face. Hatred is simple. What they feel is complicated, and complicated feelings take longer to resolve. Dawn accepted this with the gravity of a child who'd grown up around difficult truths. Running Wolf died when Dawn was 7. Before he passed, he called Hollow Voice to his bedside. Whatever he said, Hollow Voice never shared. But he emerged from that meeting with tears streaming down his face and something like peace in his eyes. He forgave me, Hollow Voice told Abigail that night. Not for everything, but for trying. He said trying was enough. Is it? Abigail asked. I don't know. But it's all I have. Winter's heart lived to see Dawn's 10th birthday, then passed quietly in her sleep. Hollow Voice mourned beside his mother's body, speaking in Blackfeet. Prayers and apologies and promises to keep trying. At the funeral, some people still wouldn't look at him. But many did. And that was more than he'd had before. Abigail and Hollow Voice grew old together in that cabin at the reservation's edge. They never stopped carrying the weight, Hollow Voice's guilt, Abigail's memories of being sold, the ghosts of 17 dead and 3 stolen years, but they carried it together. One evening, decades after that first forced marriage, they sat outside watching the sunset. Hollow Voice's hair had gone gray. Abigail's face showed the lines of a hard life. Do you regret it? Hollow Voice asked. Staying, choosing this. Abigail considered the question seriously. I regret the circumstances. I'll always hate Garrett for forcing us, but what we built from those circumstances. She took his weathered hand. No, I don't regret that. Even knowing what I am? You're not what you are. You're what you were, and what you're trying to be. Both. Always both. He smiled, that same broken smile from decades ago, never fully healed, but somehow enough. Winter's heart said that once, about carrying both. She was wise. She was patient. more patient than I deserved. They sat in silence, watching light fade over land that had seen so much pain and so much persistence. Their daughter was inside, preparing dinner. Her children, their grandchildren, played nearby. The math never balanced, Hollow Voice said quietly. 17 dead, 3 saved. My father, those children, all the lies and the few truths. It never comes out even. Maybe it's not supposed to, Abigail replied. Maybe the point isn't perfect balance. It's choosing to keep trying even when the scales are broken. Hollow Voice leaned his head against hers. Then, I'll keep trying until I can't try anymore. That's all any of us can do. The sun set. Night came. Inside the cabin, their family waited. Outside, the reservation held its breath between past and future, grief and hope, condemnation and grace. And in the space between all those impossibilities, Abigail and Hollow Voice had built something that looked remarkably like a life. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, hard-earned. And somehow, against all the calculations that said it shouldn't exist, enough. This story wasn't about redemption. It wasn't about whether a man who caused 17 deaths deserves happiness. It was about what happens when you stop pretending the math will ever balance and start living anyway. Would you have stayed like Abigail? Could you have carried the weight like Hollow Voice? Drop your thoughts below and let me know what you think happens to people who live in the space between condemned and forgiven. Subscribe for more stories that ask the questions no one wants to answer. See you in the next one.